everybody? So, the Atheist Experience, or Matt Dillahunty's radio show, has this poll on their YouTube community tab. We're going to vote and discuss in just a second. Real quick, someone had asked me to talk about the man mindset, .com, I think is the podcast. I've listened to a couple and I feel like I need to listen to a few more before I give you my opinion. So that's coming in a few days. But for the time being, would you worship a god if it were real? Why or why not? Off the cuff, you're only getting a yes or a no. There is not a I don't know, because atheism is, well, very binary, right? Either you are or you ain't. Either God exists or God doesn't exist, right? There is no room for I don't know, right? Even though they tell you that they are not convinced if God exists, right? As I've stated in the past many times, that's for the most part dishonest. That's not their ideology. Their ideology is that God doesn't exist, but they cannot take that stance, as I've stated many times before, and it should be obvious, in a debate because, well, that would put them on a level playing field with the theist. They would have to argue for that position. And because it's very difficult to prove a negative, well, they're just too intellectually lazy, or they got tired of losing all these debates, so they moved the goalpost and started calling agnosticism atheism, basically. So, this whole idea that, oh, I'm just not convinced, it's all BS, okay? Because it's a very, very binary, well, the world as they see them, insofar as God is concerned, is very binary, right? So let's answer the question. I think we all have a pretty good idea of what the atheist is going to say to this, right? Because, well, they've said it many times in many, many debates, if you've paid attention. I'm going to say yes, and I'm in the 14%, apparently. 86 from 19,000 plus votes. 86% of atheists. And you know what? Theists also listen to the show, so maybe they're voting. I would venture a guess that, some of that 14% is probably believers saying yes, right? So I think it's, in just my opinion, it's safe to say that 90% of the atheists that, if not more, that listen to Matt Dillahunty's show wouldn't worship a God even if God existed, right? So on the one hand, you mean to tell me that you're not convinced God exists, right? Which, sounds like you're kind of open-minded to the idea that maybe he does. You just want it proved in a debate or something like that. And yet, even if you were to be proved wrong, you still wouldn't venerate that being, the being that controls everything, including you, right? The being whose existence, if you deny, right, means you're going to be tormented after death for all of eternity, or something along those lines, right? At least if we're talking about Christian theism. Huh. That's pretty cool. So what to me this means, and you kind of have to read between the lines, is that, well, they believe God doesn't exist and they just don't care, right? That's what that suggests to me. But let's read some of these comments. I don't want to be worshipped by my creations, so I don't want to worship it neither. What? Whatever. I wouldn't worship something or someone just because it's real. There must be some actual reason to why do so. Well, the reasons are pretty clear, as I already explained, right? So this person must not understand what God is. Live a good life. If there are gods and they are just, they will not care how devout you have been, but will welcome you based on the virtues you have lived by. If there are gods but unjust, then you should not want to worship them. What does that have to do with anything? Here we go. Something recent happened that reminded me why I hated religion so much as a young atheist. Right? They hate religion. This isn't, I am not convinced God exists. This just isn't it, is it? Worshipping anyone is inherently toxic behavior. Any God worthy of worship shouldn't even want it. What does that have to do with anything? I don't get it. Worshipping anyone, well, God, if he exists, isn't just anyone. And why is worshipping someone inherently toxic? Why? Respect must be earned. I created you and everything that exists. Yeah, that doesn't warrant respect. Wow. Spiritual fascism. Yeah. These people are mad. They're mad at God, right? They say God doesn't exist, but they're mad at God. Wow. Why does God want me to worship it? How is God all-powerful and exceedingly petty at the same time? What? Well, one of the powers could be pettiness, right? If that's indeed what God is. None of this makes any sense. Not to me, anyway. Worship is such a weird word. I can't imagine worshiping anything or anybody. Having a high degree of reverence for it, maybe admiring it if it was worthy of admiration, but never worship. Okay, so this guy's splitting hairs and playing a semantics game. I clicked no, but I'm not really sure. I can't imagine worshiping anyone or anything, but I also don't really know what God is, so I can't say for certain that I wouldn't. That's a pretty honest answer, right? That's, in this, that is what a new atheist, quote unquote new atheist, should be, right? They don't know. They're not convinced God even exists. Or in what capacity he does, if he does, right? If there were a creator of all things, I would imagine it would not want to be worshipped, but would want to have a relationship with me, us, that's not forced. I mean, if it created you, wouldn't it make sense for you to have some kind of respect, reverence, worship for that thing? I mean, the power to create everything, including yourself. Forced. I just don't understand. Just because a king exists doesn't mean you have to obey him. It's not a king. I mean, in a sense, yes, but God, if he does exist, is so much more than just a king. If a God wants, demands worship, then it is unworthy. Because what? I don't get it. Maybe the worship is demanded because it's warranted. These people don't believe, right? They believe God doesn't exist. And then they think that they could define this being and what it wants. They reject it offhand. And then they ask, well, why would God do this? What? Well, I mean, why wouldn't he? Does he? I don't know. Does it matter what God wants? Wouldn't it make sense for you to worship that kind of a being? I mean, all these people, I guarantee you, they worship someone, be it an athlete, or a musician, a president, a politician. Like, they all worship much lesser beings than a god, right? Because they're in awe of something that those people, mortals, do or have done, right? A favorite writer, philosopher, Matt Dillahunty. A lot of these people worship Matt Dillahunty. They really do. But not God, right? Not God. Makes perfect sense. Anyway, we could have fun with these comments all day, but the basic takeaway here is that, well, atheism is dishonest, and it's a dishonest worldview, right? It's a worldview. Whether God exists or doesn't exist, right? Most atheists, 90% I would say, wouldn't worship that being, right? If it weren't a worldview, shouldn't you first get past the question if God does or doesn't exist before you have an opinion of how you would feel about all of that, right? If it's not a worldview, okay, and you're just a philosopher looking to get to the bottom of things, which is how new atheists present themselves, right? This is the cloak that they put on. If it weren't an ideology, right, why would you have all these ideas about God or how you feel about God? If you're merely asking the question, does God exist or does he not exist? If that's all you're doing, why do you already, and it's not a worldview, right? Atheism. You're merely asking the question. Why do you already have all these answers, right? There's something wrong with this logical process here. You haven't even gotten to answering the question whether God does or does not exist, but you already have all these notions about this being, right? That this is what this being is like, even though you don't even know if it exists. And even if someone could prove to you that he exists, you would still disrespect that being, right? That's not philosophy, okay? So much as these people try to pretend that atheism is a philosophy, and, for a very select few, in my opinion, someone like Alex Malpass, unless he's a very, very good actor, I think it is a philosophy, right? But most of these new atheist dorks out there, they're just dishonest POSs. It is what it is. It's not my fault. I know some people will find this offensive, but if it's not my fault you're a dishonest POS, it really isn't. At the very least, be honest. Be all the way true and keep it real. Don't give us this bullshit story, or I don't know if God, I'm merely asking the question. And then you have all these answers that would follow only if that first question that you supposedly have were answered in the first place. And according to you, it's not. It doesn't make any sense. It's a dishonest ideology. It's not a philosophy, because a philosopher, right? If you could prove something to the philosopher, his thinking process would have to, a philosopher will adjust his thinking process. He will take truth on board and change his worldview, right? But an atheist, 90% of them or so, say, even if you could prove that God exists, I still wouldn't change my worldview. A worldview that I don't have, because atheism isn't a worldview, right? Because I'm merely asking a question, even though I already have all these answers that you could only honestly answer after you answered the first and foremost question that I'm supposedly still trying to get to the bottom of, right? Does God exist? These people don't make any sense. They're super dishonest. They're not logical. They lack God. Atheism is not a philosophy. It's an ideology, and a very dishonest at that. And this is proof. At least I seem to think so. Thanks for watching.